Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about standard libraries. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what would you say is the significance and why is it so important for a programming language to have a standard library? Sorry, a good standard library. Well, this thing is going to touch on one of my favorite discussions when it comes to software and programming languages. So let me see if I can get this right. You have probably met someone at some point who has something to say about Java not being the greatest language in the world or something like that. You probably had a similar conversation with people who really don't like, say, C#, and then you probably talk to those same people, and perhaps they might have had something really nice to say about Golang, for example, or other similar programming languages. And so the thing that usually comes into discussion are things like performance and things like that. That's the thing that a lot of people care about when they talk about this. First of all, and you have people who like syntax. There's all kinds of flavors related to people who like various things about programming languages. Now, there is another group, very seldomly spoken about in at least the public eye of software, not like in the trendy parts of the places of the internet where you hang out with all the cool developers. They don't really usually talk about these sort of people. And these are the sort of people who kind of go and say, like my favorite one is in frontend. They say, I like Angular because it has everything, for example. I've been on occasion known to say the same thing about Jest, the test runner for JavaScript, for example. And the same thing is said about, usually at the very least, Java and C#. And now why is that? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, the reason why, and I argue as well that this is the reason why these sort of languages are the main languages in corporate and enterprise level development, is because when you have a language that has a pretty good standard library, you gain a benefit. Now we're going to talk about the consequence as well, which is sort of the other side of the spectrum, but you are right now, if you're watching this in, 2025-ish, something like that, you are right now in a stage of software development where open source and contributor-based models and so forth and so forth is sort of the trend, right? But it used to be that everything was corporately owned. If you know anything about the history of, say, Sun and Oracle or Microsoft for that matter, you know that this is something that they transitioned into. It's not something that's always been there. Now, the reason why people like these languages usually, and corporations love them, is because if you are looking for something that includes basically quote-unquote everything you need to develop a wide range of different types of systems, applications, so on and so forth, having a really large language with a lot of standard parts of the library is a pretty good thing. That is something that Java does really well. It has like 1 million libraries that are included in the standard that you can leverage, you can use for most things, right? C#, same deal there, or the .NET ecosystem and so forth. Tons of libraries, tons of standard stuff that you can use and so forth and so forth. And what's more important, which I argue is a little bit lost on some people, is the nuance of having an ecosystem that may not be necessarily part of the standard, but very well maintained libraries and complementary things that you can download or things like pull in packages and stuff like that fits really well in that ecosystem. It's a stable ecosystem, as we like to call it. Now, the thing about that is very powerful is so that you can avoid what happens to, let's just say, quite a lot of people, especially in frontend. Holy shit, this happens in frontend like all the time. It happened recently in .NET as well, where packages like Fluent Assertion, Mediator, and I think it was Automapper went commercial. Now, for you guys, that might not be all that significant, but as you can imagine, if you have, like in my department, for example, every single, right now, for some reason, every single .NET developer that I know seems to believe, not all of them, but a lot of them, that the clean architecture using exactly these three libraries, it's like water or air. You cannot possibly exist without it. And what now happens is that, okay, so this little thing that's not really necessary, depending on how you look at it, is now commercially licensed, and so now you have to pay for it. And so what do I do, who feel like this is probably a waste? Well, I say that no, guys, you have to shift out of it and just use the standard library. Now, imagine if that had been already part of the standard, that then the licensing, all that stuff, we would have already paid for it. But the thing about third-party libraries and not having standard libraries is that the standard is maintained as part of the language. You don't really know what's going to happen. Well, I'm not going to say that you always know either with the standard, but when you're using a third-party library, you are taking more of a risk. Like, you're getting benefits because, you're using these libraries because they're doing something that's not in the standard. But if you have it in the standard, that gives you some measure of control and security over the future of your project, because you know that you have less there are less people who has an effect on how your system is going to be affected, and so forth and so forth, changes in the environment, for example. Now, that is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, if you I imagine the poor people who had Java back in the day when Oracle took over and so forth, you can make the wrong bet on the standard as well, like the whole platform as a language, for example. That's the risk you take these days with younger languages, for example, where they're a little bit up and coming. You don't really know if they're going to be maintained or so forth, and you don't know where things are going to go with them. So you're always in that sort of weird spot where you don't, as I've said before, guys, software development, when it comes to libraries and stuff like that, it's a little bit like the stock market. You do investments towards various things and sort of hope and pray that it's going to turn out well for you. But it's the same thing when front-end comes involved. Anybody who's ever worked on a serious front-end project, or a few of them over time, will know how many packages there are in, say, NPM, and how very quickly you can find that you have so many libraries for all kinds of stuff. And that is an example of an ecosystem that, at least I argue, that's the thing that is not, that's the bad part of having a lot of libraries. If the ecosystem is developed by a lot of various maintainers and they have a hard time aligning on how to do things, you might find that your packages don't really click with each other. You might find that there are tons of security issues because you have a wider surface of packages that come into your supply chain, or supply chain attack type of deals and so forth, and you have a lot more code to maintain. And in JavaScript, that's extra important, for example, when you do front end and so forth, because every package you add adds performance weight to your application. So if you can use the browser's native APIs, you have a performance benefit there as well. So it depends a little bit on the specifics of which part of the language you're dealing with, right? Now, the tricky part about all this is that although, yes, it would be great that everything was in the standard, right, to a certain point, the problem is that it used to be that case. And languages such as, say, Java and C#, who used to have the idea that we're going to own everything, every single package that you ever need is going to come from us. And we have very scheduled release dates and set timelines when we develop stuff for you, and we control absolutely everything, and then we license the shit out of you. Now, the problem with that approach is that if someone out there in the world is more clever than you are, well, nobody can leverage all that amazing work that people are doing in the open source world, right? And that's why the open source world became a thing, because people basically felt that the way that these the languages were developing their standard libraries did not measure up to the needs of the market. And that's pretty natural if you think about it. There is no way that a single company with a really popular programming language is going to be able to create a library for every single thing that you can imagine. That's not going to be possible. And so that's why we pivoted a little bit now and started doing more open source stuff. And I mean, Java and so far, in the more recent version, they've sort of started embracing that, like Oracle has started embracing it. The same thing for C# and so forth. So at this point, it's really a way off. So the thing that I usually tell people is that there are, if you really need it, if it's not something that is easily fixed by using the standards and so forth, go and take make a bet on a stable package. I mean, I still say this like at my job as like our mantra. Use a third-party library or like something that is not in the standard if you really need it, and it makes a really big difference for you. But be very careful when you're just using like a bunch of ad-hoc packages, because if you add too many packages, you get a different sort of problem, which is maintaining that over time. You get extra bloat and code issues and so forth, and security potentially issues with that and so forth. So the closer you can keep yourself to the standard, the better. It's the same thing I tell people in the JavaScript language, for example, that the thing is, if you look at how quickly the front-end world changes in terms of like, you know, CSS and JS went in, became a thing, and now it's on the way out again as far as I know, and you have various frameworks that come up and so forth and so forth. I think you can imagine it's kind of hard to tell if these technical decisions and investing in these different libraries is going to pan out well for you. The thing you do know is that if you want to be really sure that your code is going to be relevant in, say, you know, a few years, etc., if you base it on the browser standards, you have something very akin to in the investment markets and so forth to gold. It's not like a perfect thing that will never change its value or something like that, but it's something that is a little bit more stable than like high-risk stock options, if that makes sense. So what I want you to take away from this is that having a really big standard library gives you one very nice benefit, and that is that you don't have to bring in as many third-party dependencies, which is very nice for you, because usually if you have a first-class citizen type of support with a language that has a really big company backing it, they will try to the greatest extent possible, take care of that language for you. Now the problem is for a lot of other people is that they don't want that, all those extra languages. That's why people hate on, one of the reasons people hate on Java, for example, and why I hate Scala, for example, because it's simply too big. The language has so many features that it's basically impossible to decide on what approach are we going to do. And that's what Python, for example, does really nice. Or Golang as another example, like where you have a language that has a more narrow set of standard libraries and a more opinionated way, and like some people call it lightweight, it's a smaller language, which is pretty nice if you really don't need all those extra packages. For a corporation who has like hundreds and hundreds of people with like thousands of different systems, having a large language might be a good investment for them, because they really do have that diversity. That's what they are optimizing for, and that's what their these languages are really nice for. But for your own little side project and you want performance or something like that, then maybe Golang is the way to go. And then you add third-party dependencies to sort of cover up the stuff that you don't get from the standard. And that is the thing that the best way I can describe it is like stock options. You can invest in something sort of stable, like gold, for example, and that has its benefits. But if you want something that is a little bit more exciting and that potentially carries more risk with it, but also brings other sorts of benefits, then a third-party library or like something external to the standard is the way to go. And which one is right for you? It really comes down to being a really good investment broker, and that's the thing that usually the seniors should bring to the table. They should know that these packages and these libraries are like sort of essential, like if it's an open source project or so forth, to make success happen for the project. These things are just fluff things we don't really need, and we can just make do with the standard because there are already packages there that will basically do that for us. That's the way you should think about it. Have a great day.